Hello, story lovers. Tonight, we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe. Share it with someone who loves a powerful love story. And tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. The chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors so polished they reflected the glittering crowd like a mirror. Crystal clinked in rhythmic harmony. Laughter rose and fell with the swell of orchestral music. Every surface seemed designed to dazzle, to remind her she didn't belong. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her palms clammy against satin, her heart hammering louder than the violins. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Show her face, support her colleague, slip out before anyone important noticed her. But fate had other plans. His laugh cut through the music first, sharp, familiar, cruel. Her ex stood in the center of a circle of beautiful people, their suits gleaming, their smiles practiced to perfection. When his gaze landed on her, time stopped. He lifted his glass high. "There she is," he called out, voice carrying across marble and malice. "The girl who never knew her place? Still trying to sneak into worlds she doesn't belong in?" The laughter that followed felt like knives. Heat rushed into her cheeks. At 28, she'd thought herself hardened against his cruelty. But the wound reopened in an instant. Around her, heads turned. Smiles sharpened. Each look carried judgment. Each whisper pressed her further into the corner of her own shame. She stepped back. Her heels tapped against marble. The exit felt impossibly far. "You know," her ex continued, savoring her discomfort, "some people never learn. They keep reaching above their station, hoping to catch a little glitter." The crowd laughed again. Her chest tightened. Panic surged through her veins like fire. Her mind screamed for escape, for anything to sever this humiliation. Then a hand appeared beside hers. Strong, steady, unflinching. She didn't think. Instinct propelled her trembling fingers to close around it, the grasp of someone drowning who'd finally found a rope. His hand was warm, firm, a quiet anchor in chaos. The moment their palms met, steadiness coursed through her, so sharp it left her breathless. He didn't recoil. Instead, he turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on her ex and the smug circle surrounding him. His eyes were calm, his jaw unyielding. The silence that followed was more powerful than any raised voice. The laughter faltered. Recognition spread like ripples through water. At 35, he carried the weight of authority that needed no introduction. The immaculate lines of his tailored suit spoke of wealth, but his presence spoke of power. He was the billionaire whose name was whispered in boardrooms, the man who appeared rarely but whose movements shaped entire markets. And now he stood with her, their hands clasped, as if they'd always belonged together. She dared to glance up at him, searching for clues in his expression. His face was unreadable, carved in control. But the subtle tightening of his fingers around hers told her what she needed to know. She was protected. A hush spread through the ballroom, thick and electric. The mocking circle shifted uneasily. Even her ex stumbled, his cruel smirk fading into uncertainty. For the first time that night, the silence belonged to her. She barely comprehended what she'd done. One reckless impulse had tethered her to a man far removed from her small existence. Yet as her ex's laughter died and the crowd's stares softened into curiosity, all she could feel was the steady weight of that hand grounding her. The shame that had threatened to drown her ebbed away. Her heart still hammered, but each breath came easier. She realized she was standing taller, not because she'd found courage on her own, but because she'd borrowed it from the stranger beside her. The billionaire turned his head slightly toward her. His voice, low enough for only her to hear, carried an authority that both soothed and unnerved her. "If you're going to hold my hand, then allow me to introduce you properly." She blinked up at him, startled. Before she could protest, he faced the crowd, his arm guiding hers with subtle possession. "This is my date," he said smoothly, his tone carrying across the ballroom with practiced ease. A ripple ran through the room like a sudden breeze. Conversations halted. Glasses froze midair. Eyes widened in disbelief. Her ex's smirk collapsed completely, replaced by visible shock. She, the girl once laughed at for never belonging, had just been claimed by the one person no one dared question. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to yank her hand back, to scream that it wasn't true. Yet the warmth of his palm steadied her trembling fingers and anchored her feet to the marble floor. Her ex stepped forward, his voice breaking the fragile quiet. "You expect us to believe this?" His laugh cracked under pressure, desperate and brittle. But the billionaire's gaze, dark and unwavering, pinned him in place. "Believe it or not," he replied coolly, "is irrelevant. What matters is, she's with me tonight." No one dared laugh now. The orchestra resumed timidly. Aware they were merely background to the true drama unfolding, she wanted to disappear, yet a strange sense of safety wrapped around her. The stranger's grip was firm, not demanding, but protective. Hours later, when the gala dwindled and guests began to leave, she slipped away to the edge of the grand staircase outside. The night air was crisp, the city lights winking below. She finally dared to release the hand she'd clung to like salvation. She turned to the stranger, embarrassment burning across her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have." He cut her apology short with a slight lift of his brow, amusement glinting in his eyes. "You needed help. I was there. It was simple." She shook her head, mortified. "You don't understand. They'll talk." "They already think they already thought less of you," he interrupted firmly. "I saw it in their eyes. And yet you stood your ground. You did what was necessary. That's not shameful. That's survival." His words struck deep, heavier than casual reassurance. She lowered her gaze, staring at her trembling fingers. He glanced at her hand, still quivering, and reached out deliberately, enclosing it once more. "If you're going to take my hand," he said softly, "don't let go so easily." Her breath caught, her heart stuttering with confusion she couldn't name. Gratitude, attraction, disbelief, all colliding into a storm. "I didn't even know your name," she murmured, realizing the absurdity of it all. "Perhaps," he said, the corner of his mouth curving faintly. "That makes it more interesting." She couldn't decide whether he was teasing or simply enigmatic. She pulled her hand back gently this time, though the phantom of his touch lingered stubbornly against her skin. They parted that night with only the echo of a gaze. Yet the memory of his calm claim in front of the world refused to leave her. She replayed it over and over on her way home, each repetition stirring new waves of confusion. Who was he really, beyond the name and reputation whispered in expensive rooms? And why had he, a man with limitless options, chosen to shield her? But the questions that haunted her most as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, were far more dangerous. What would he expect in return? And what had she just agreed to by holding his hand? The glare of her phone screen was the first thing she saw the next morning, and with it came the storm she'd feared. Notifications poured in endlessly. Photos of her hand entwined with his dominated every feed, the captions spinning wild narratives. Some called her a mystery. Others labeled her a gold digger. The cruelest comments echoed her ex's voice. Reducing her existence to a joke played out in front of strangers, her chest tightened with every swipe. Shame clawing up her throat. But beneath the shame, something else stirred. Anger. She wasn't the girl who'd let him humiliate her anymore. She'd stood in that ballroom, held that stranger's hand, and survived. Still, survival had consequences. Her ex had taken to social media with venom. Posts dripping with sarcasm spread quickly, subtle enough to avoid legal trouble, but pointed enough that everyone knew who they were about. "Some people will do anything to get ahead," he'd written. "Even attach themselves to wallets bigger than their own worth." The comments erupted beneath it. Speculation fed the fire at 28. Working quietly as a PR assistant in a small company, she had neither the power nor the resources to fight such noise. Each word chipped away at her confidence, dragging back old fears of being less than, of being nothing but the butt of someone's cruel joke. Then, like an echo returning at the exact moment it was needed most, A card slipped from the pocket of her purse. Heavy, cream-colored, embossed with his name and a number. She stared at it, fingers trembling, the memory of his voice circling in her mind. If you're going to hold my hand, don't let go so easily, she swallowed, conflicted. Calling him would mean admitting she needed help again. But pretending she could withstand this storm alone felt impossible that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his face intruding on her thoughts. By morning, she'd made her decision. Her fingers shook as she dialed the number. It rang twice before a smooth, familiar voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. No greeting. No pretense. Just calm certainty. Her throat tightened. I need to see you, she said quietly. It's gotten worse. I know, he replied. I've seen the headlines. Come to my office. 3:00. He gave her the address and ended the call before she could respond. The building was glass and steel, towering above the city like a monument to power. She felt small walking through the revolving doors, her sneakers squeaking against polished floors as suited figures swept past her without a glance. The receptionist barely looked up before waving her toward the private elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, he was waiting. He stood by floor 2 ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he owned. He turned as she stepped out, his expression unreadable. You came, he said simply. I didn't have a choice. His mouth curved slightly. There's always a choice. She walked toward him. Her heart beat loud in her ears. They're destroying me online. My ex, the headlines, the comments. I can't make it stop. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Do you want me to make it stop? Can you? Yes. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. She swallowed hard. What would that cost me? His gaze didn't waver. Your time? Your presence. Your cooperation? I don't understand. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The story we started at the gala needs to continue. If we let it die now, the damage will follow you forever. But if we feed it, control it, shape it into something believable, the noise will fade. People will move on. Her stomach twisted. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? I want you to be seen with me. In public, at events. For as long as it takes to convince the world this wasn't a desperate grab for attention, she stepped back, her mind reeling. That's insane. People will see through it. Will they? He tilted his head. You held my hand in front of a room full of witnesses. I claimed you as mine. The foundation is already laid. All we have to do is build on it. Right. And what do you get out of this? His expression shifted, something darker flickering behind his eyes. A distraction. From what? That's not your concern. The coldness in his tone sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't kindness. This was a transaction. She crossed her arms. What if I say no? He shrugged, turning back toward the window. Then you walk out that door and deal with the consequences on your own. Your ex will keep twisting the knife. The headlines will paint you as a fraud. Your reputation, your career, everything you've worked for will crumble under the weight of public opinion. His words were brutal in their honesty. She hated that he was right. How long? She asked quietly. 3 months, maybe 4. Long enough to make it believable. Long enough for people to forget why they cared in the first place. She stared at his back, the tension coiling in her chest. Oh. And after that, we part ways. Quietly. Amicably. You get your life back, and I get mine. It sounded so simple. So transactional. But nothing about him felt simple. She thought of her ex's smug face, the cruel laughter, the shame that had nearly crushed her. She thought of the headlines painting her as a liar, a user, someone desperate and pathetic. She thought of the way this man's hand had steadied her when the world turned against her. Fine, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll do it. He turned back to face her, something like satisfaction crossing his features. Good. He moved to his desk, pulling out a folder and sliding it across to her. You'll need to sign this. A non-disclosure agreement. Standard. She picked it up, scanning the dense legal text. It covered confidentiality, conduct, public appearances, everything clinical and cold. She hesitated only a moment before signing. When she looked up, he was watching her with an intensity that made her pulse skip. "One more thing," he said quietly. "What?" "If we're going to do this, you need to trust me. In public, we need to look like we belong together. That means no hesitation. No second guessing. When I touch you, you don't flinch. When I speak to you, you respond like you know me. Can you do that?" Her throat felt dry. "I can try." His gaze softened. "Just barely. That's all I ask." He extended his hand toward her. An echo of that night in the ballroom. She looked at it, her heart hammering. This time, when she took it, it wasn't out of desperation. It was a choice. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. And for a moment, she almost believed this could work. Almost. "There's a charity gala this weekend," he said, still holding her hand. "We'll make our first official appearance together. I'll have a dress sent to your apartment. Be ready by 7. She nodded, unable to find her voice. He released her hand, and the absence of his touch felt strangely cold. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the elevator. "One more thing." She looked back. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked almost like warning. "This arrangement works only if you remember what it is. Deal. Nothing more." The words landed like stones in her chest. She nodded once and stepped into the elevator as the doors closed. She caught one last glimpse of him standing by the window, silhouetted against the city he commanded. And she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a deal with someone far more dangerous than her ex had ever been. The dress arrived in a black box tied with silk ribbon, no card attached. When she lifted the lid, tissue paper whispered beneath her fingers, revealing midnight blue fabric that shimmered like water under moonlight. It fit perfectly. She stared at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The dress hugged her body in ways that made her feel both powerful and exposed, vulnerable and untouchable at once. At 7 sharp, car pulled up outside her building. Black, sleek, anonymous. The driver opened the door without a word, and she slid into leather seats that smelled of money and secrets. He was waiting inside. He wore a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a film, all sharp lines and controlled power. When his gaze swept over her, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. "You look perfect," he said simply. The compliment shouldn't have affected her, but warmth crept up her neck. "So do you." His mouth curved slightly. The drive was quiet, tension humming between them like a live wire. She watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, her heart beating faster with each passing block. "Nervous?" he asked, not looking at her. "Should I be?" "Probably." She turned to face him. "That's not reassuring." He finally met her gaze, and the intensity there stole her breath. "Tonight everyone will be watching us, judging, looking for cracks. We need to give them nothing. And how do we do that?" He reached across the seat, his hand finding hers in the darkness. His thumb traced slow circles against her palm, a gesture so intimate it sent electricity racing up her arm. "Like this," he said quietly. "We make them believe." The gala was different from the last one. Bigger. More exclusive. The kind of event where power brokers and politicians mingled with old money and new empires. When they stepped out of the car together, cameras flashed like lightning. His hands settled on the small of her back, possessive and sure. She forced herself not to tense, to lean into the touch as if it were natural. As if they'd done this 1,000 times before. The questions came fast. "Mr. Ashford, who is your date? How long have you been together? Is this serious?" He ignored them all, guiding her up the steps with quiet authority. But just before they reached the doors, he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Smile," he whispered, "like you're exactly where you want to be." And the cameras erupted again. Inside, The gala glittered with wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne towers. Conversations that shaped the world conducted in hushed tones. She felt out of place immediately. But his hand never left her. At her back, around her waist, holding hers as he introduced her to faces she'd only seen in magazines. "This is Eleanor," he said to a silver-haired man whose company was worth billions. "She's with me." The man's eyes assessed her with the precision of someone used to calculating worth in seconds. But whatever he saw must have passed his test, because he smiled warmly. "A pleasure, Eleanor. Any woman who can capture Dominic's attention must be extraordinary." Dominic. It was the first time she'd heard his first name spoken aloud. And hearing it in that moment made everything feel suddenly, dangerously real. The night blurred into a series of careful performances. Smiling at the right moments. Laughing softly at jokes she didn't find funny. Standing close to Dominic while he discussed mergers and acquisitions with men who moved markets with phone calls. She played her part well. Too well, perhaps. Because somewhere between the champagne and the carefully choreographed touches, something shifted. His hand at her waist felt less like strategy and more like comfort. The way he leaned in to speak to her, his voice low and private, sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. And when she looked up at him, catching him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, her heart stumbled over itself. This was dangerous. Halfway through the night, she excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment away from his overwhelming presence. She was washing her hands when the door opened behind her. A woman entered, tall, beautiful, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Eleanor's rent. Their eyes met in the mirror. Recognition flashed across the woman's face, followed quickly by something sharp and cold. "So you're the mystery girl," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Everyone's been talking about you." Eleanor forced a polite smile. "Have they?" The woman moved closer, reapplying lipstick with practiced precision. "You should be careful with Dominic. He's not the man you think he is." Eleanor's stomach clenched. "I don't know what you mean," the woman laughed, the sound harsh in the tiled space. "Of course you don't. That's what makes this so predictable." She capped her lipstick and turned to face Eleanor fully. 3 months ago, I stood where you're standing now. On his arm, playing the part of the perfect girlfriend. He was charming, attentive, made me feel like I mattered. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Then one day it was over. No explanation. No warning. Just a polite dismissal and an NDA to sign. The words hit like ice water. "I don't know what arrangement you have with him," the woman continued, her eyes cold, "but whatever he promised you, it's a lie. Dominic Ashford doesn't do relationships. He does transactions. And when he's done with you, he'll discard you like all the others." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you for the warning," the woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't say I didn't try to help." She left, the door swinging shut behind her. Eleanor gripped the edge of the sink, her reflection staring back at her with wide eyes. What had she gotten herself into? When she returned to the ballroom, Dominic was waiting near the bar, his expression darkening the moment he saw her face. "What happened?" he asked immediately. "Nothing. Don't lie to me." She glanced around at the crowd, then back at him. "Can we go somewhere private?" He didn't hesitate. His hand found hers, and he led her through a side door into a quiet hallway lined with paintings worth more than houses. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and controlled. "A woman in the bathroom. She said she used to be with you? That this whole thing is just a pattern you repeat?" His jaw tightened. "Her name? She didn't say what did she look like." Eleanor described her, and recognition flashed across his face. "Victoria? Is it true?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Am I just another transaction to you?" He stared at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes. Yes, the honesty cut deeper than a lie would have. "But," he continued, stepping closer, "that doesn't mean I don't care what happens to you. That's not enough, I know." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable. She should have walked away then. Should have ended this arrangement before it destroyed her the way it clearly destroyed the woman in red. But when Dominic reached up, his hand cupping her face with unexpected gentleness, all her resolve crumbled. "I didn't expect this," he said quietly. "Any of it. I thought this would be simple. A mutually beneficial arrangement. But every time I look at you, it gets more complicated." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know anymore." His thumb traced her cheekbone, and the touch sent fire through her veins. "Maybe we should end this now," she whispered, even as every cell in her body screamed the opposite. "Before someone gets hurt?" "Too late," he said, his voice rough. "We passed that point the moment you took my hand." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, and for one breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. But instead, he stepped back, his expression shuddering. "We should go back," he said, his voice cold again. "Professional, people will notice we're gone." Whiplash of his withdrawal left her dizzy. She followed him back to the ballroom, her heart aching in ways she didn't understand. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Smiles, touches, the perfect performance. But everything had changed. When he dropped her off at her apartment later, he walked her to the door like a gentleman. His hand lingered on her lower back, and she could feel the tension radiating from him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For tonight, you did well." The compliment felt hollow. She turned to go inside, but his voice stopped her. "Eleanor." She looked back. His expression was tortured, conflicted in a way she'd never seen before. "Be careful," he said. "With me. With this. With all of it. Why? Because I'm not the hero in this story. And when this ends, I don't want you to hate me." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back to the car, leaving her standing in the doorway with more questions than answers. She watched him drive away, her heart pounding. And for the first time, she realized the most dangerous part of this arrangement wasn't the public scrutiny or the media attention. It was the way she was starting to feel about him, and the terrifying certainty that he was starting to feel something too. 3 weeks blurred together in a series of calculated touches and stolen glances. Dinners at restaurants where paparazzi conveniently appeared. Gallery openings where his hand never left her waist. Morning coffee runs that ended up on social media within minutes. The world bought the story they were selling, but somewhere between the performance and reality, the lines had started to blur. She knew the exact moment it happened. They'd been at his penthouse, going over their schedule for the week. Rain hammered against floor-to-ceiling windows, the city below shrouded in gray. She'd made a joke about something trivial, and he'd laughed. Really laughed. The sound unguarded and genuine. Their eyes had met across the glass coffee table. The air had shifted. He'd stood, crossing to where she sat, and pulled her to her feet without a word. His hand had cupped her face the way it had at the gala. This time there was no hesitation. He'd kissed her, not for cameras, not for witnesses. Just for them, it had been soft at first, tentative, as if he were asking permission even as he took it. But when she'd kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his hair, something had broken open between them. Desperation, need, 3 weeks of careful distance, combusting into something neither of them could control. They'd barely made it to his bedroom, afterward. Lying tangled in expensive sheets with rain pattering against glass, she'd felt his fingers trace patterns on her bare shoulder. "This wasn't part of the deal," she'd whispered. "I know. So what is this?" He'd been quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he'd finally said. "But I don't want to stop." It had been 4 days ago now. Sitting in a cafe across from her best friend Maya, Eleanor felt the weight of her secret pressing down like a stone. "You're glowing," Maya said, studying her over a latte. "This fake relationship thing is really working for you." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "It's not fake anymore." Maya's eyes widened. "Wait. Wait? What?" "We crossed a line. Multiple lines. I don't know what we're doing, but it's real now, Eleanor." Maya's voice carried warning. "You signed an NDA. This whole thing has an expiration date. What happens when it ends?" "I don't know. Have you talked to him about it?" "Not really. Every time I try, he shuts down." Maya leaned forward, her expression serious. Listen to me. I love you, but this is dangerous. Men like him don't change. They don't suddenly decide to make fake relationships real. You need to protect yourself. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're falling in love with someone who's essentially paying you to be his girlfriend. The words stung because they were true. Eleanor's phone buzzed. A text from Dominic. Need to see you? It's urgent. Her heart jumped. I have to go, she said. Already standing, Maya grabbed her wrist. Be careful, please. Eleanor nodded. But she was already thinking about the way Dominic had looked at her last night. Like she was the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. She arrived at his office 30 minutes later, her pulse racing. His assistant waved her through immediately, but something felt off. The usual quiet efficiency of the space was replaced by tension thick enough to choke on. Dominic stood by his desk, his back to the door. When he turned, his expression was carved from ice. We need to talk, he said. Her stomach dropped. What's wrong? He held up a tablet, the screen showing a news article. The headline made her blood run cold. Billionaire's girlfriend scandal. Eleanor Chen's hidden past exposed. Beneath it were photos. Her and her ex. Old social media posts she'd deleted years ago. Messages taken out of context. But the worst was the quote attributed to her ex. She's done this before. Attached herself to men with money, using them until they wise up. Dominic Ashford is just her latest target. Eleanor's vision blurred. That's not true. He's lying. Everything in that article is twisted, taken out of context, I know. His calm response stopped her cold. You know? I had you investigated the day after the first gala. Before I made you the offer. I know about your ex, the relationship, what really happened. I know everything in that article is character assassination. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something else. You investigated me? Of course I did. Did you think I'd enter into an arrangement with a stranger without knowing who they were? The coldness in his voice chilled her. If you knew it was lies, then what's the problem? He set the tablet down, his jaw tight. The problem is, my board doesn't care about truth. They care about perception. And right now, the perception is that I'm being manipulated by someone with a history of using men for their money. So what are you saying? His eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her heart stop. I'm saying we need to end this now. Before it damages my company's reputation beyond repair. Words hit like physical blows. You're choosing your reputation over me. I'm choosing my company over a relationship. That was never supposed to be real in the first place. She stepped back as if he'd slapped her. 4 days ago, you were in my bed telling me you didn't want this to stop. 4 days ago, this article didn't exist. So that's it. One negative headline, and you're done. His expression hardened. You knew what this was from the beginning. A transaction. An arrangement. You signed the NDA. You agreed to the terms. That was before nothing. He cut her off sharply. This is exactly what I warned you about. I told you to be careful. I told you I wasn't the hero. But you didn't listen. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You're a coward, she said quietly. You felt something real for the first time in your carefully controlled life. And the moment it got complicated, you ran. Something flickered in his expression. There and gone in an instant. Believe what you want. My lawyer will contact you about the termination of our arrangement. You'll receive the agreed-upon compensation. The NDA remains in effect. I don't want your money. Nevertheless, you'll receive it. Consider it payment for services rendered. The casual cruelty of the words broke something inside her. I was falling in love with you, she whispered. His mask slipped for just a moment, pain flashing across his face before he locked it down again. Then you were a fool. She turned and walked toward the door. Her vision blurred with tears she wouldn't let fall until she was alone. But his voice stopped her one last time. Eleanor. She didn't turn around. For what it's worth, he said, his voice rough. I'm sorry. No, You're not, she said. You're just sorry it got messy. She left without looking back. The elevator ride down felt like descending into hell. By the time she reached the street, the tears were flowing freely. Her phone rang. Maya. I just saw the article, Maya said immediately. Are you okay? He ended it. Oh, honey, just threw me away like I was nothing. Like the past 3 weeks meant nothing. Where are you? Outside his building. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. Eleanor ended the call and sank onto a bench, her whole body shaking. People walked past, too absorbed in their own lives to notice another. Heartbroken girl crying on a street corner. She pulled out her phone and opened the article again, forcing herself to read every poisonous word. Her ex had truly outdone himself. Every intimate detail of their failed relationship twisted into evidence of her supposed manipulation, and Dominic had believed it enough to walk away. No, that wasn't fair. He'd said he knew it was lies. He'd just chosen his company over her anyway. Her phone buzzed with a new notification. Another article. This one with a statement from Dominic's publicist. Mr. Ashford and Ms. Chen have mutually decided to end their relationship. Mr. Ashford wishes her well and requests privacy during this time. Mutual as if she'd had any. Choi-Maya arrived 20 minutes later, pulling Eleanor into a fierce hug. Come on, she said gently. Let's get you home. But as they walked toward Maya's car, Eleanor's phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Ms. Chen. A woman's voice, professional and cold. This is Jennifer Ward. I'm a reporter with Eleanor. Hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. It didn't stop ringing for the next 3 hours. By midnight, sitting in Maya's apartment with her phone finally silenced, Eleanor understood the true cost of her deal with Dominic Ashford. He'd protected her from her ex's cruelty, only to unleash something far worse. Because now, the entire world wanted her story, her pain, her humiliation. And she was utterly, completely alone. I should have listened to you, she said quietly, staring at the dark screen of her phone. Maya squeezed her hand. You followed your heart. That's not a crime. It feels like one. Her phone lit up with a text. For one desperate moment, she thought it might be Dominic, but it was from her ex. Told you that you didn't belong in his world. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Eleanor's hands shook with rage. She'd been a fool. Maya had warned her. Dominic had warned her. Even Victoria in the red dress had warned her, but she'd believed in something that was never real. The worst part wasn't the heartbreak. It wasn't even the public humiliation. It was the knowledge that somewhere in his penthouse, surrounded by his wealth and power and carefully constructed walls, Dominic was probably relieved. Relieved that he'd escaped before things got too real. Relieved that he'd protected what mattered most, his empire, and she hated him for it, almost as much as she hated herself for still loving him, despite everything. 2 weeks passed like a wound that wouldn't close. Eleanor stopped reading the articles, stopped checking social media, stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. She went to work, smiled when required, and retreated into numbness the moment she was alone. Maya stayed close, a constant presence, bringing food Eleanor didn't eat and offering comfort she couldn't accept. You need to talk about it, Maya said on day 16. There's nothing to talk about. He used you, I know. He broke your heart, I know. So why do you keep checking your phone like you're waiting for him to call? Eleanor had no answer for that. The truth was, part of her still hoped. Hoped that he'd realize what he'd thrown away. Hoped that he'd fight for her the way she'd stupidly dreamed he might. But Dominic Ashford didn't fight for anyone but himself. She learned that the hard way when his lawyer delivered the check. More money than she'd make in 2 years. Payment for services rendered, just like he'd promised. She'd torn it up and thrown it in the trash. On day 19. Her ex showed up at her office. Security called before letting him up. And Eleanor's first instinct was to say no. But rage, dormant for weeks, suddenly flared hot and bright. Let him come, she said. He walked into the small conference room with the same smug expression he'd worn at the gala. But something was different now. He looked nervous. "What do you want?" Eleanor asked coldly. "I came to apologize." She laughed, the sound harsh. "Really? That's your play?" He shifted, uncomfortably. "Look, I went too far with the article. Things got out of hand. You destroyed my reputation because your ego couldn't handle seeing me with someone successful." "He used you," her ex said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "Can't you see that? He's no better than you think I am." "You're right," Eleanor said quietly. "He did use me. But the difference is, I knew what Dominic was from the start. He never pretended to be anything other than what he was. You, on the other hand, spent 2 years pretending to love me while tearing me down every chance you got." Her ex's face hardened. "I knew this was a waste of time." "You're still defending him?" "I'm not defending him. I'm done with him. But I'm also done with you. Whatever power you thought you had over me, you lost it the moment I walked away. And no article, no public humiliation, nothing you do will ever make me doubt that decision again." She stood, walking toward the door. "Don't contact me again. If you do, I'll file for a restraining order." She left him sitting there. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than pain. She felt free. That night, alone in her apartment, Eleanor made a decision. She opened her laptop and began to type. Not an explanation. Not a defense. Just her truth. She wrote about what it felt like to be publicly humiliated by someone she'd once trusted. About grabbing a stranger's hand in desperation. About signing an agreement that promised protection, but delivered something far more complicated. She wrote about falling in love with someone emotionally unavailable, and the heartbreak of being discarded when things got messy. She didn't name Dominic. Didn't violate the NDA, but anyone reading between the lines would understand when she finished. She stared at the words for a long time, then she deleted them. This wasn't her story to tell publicly. Not anymore. She'd spent so long being defined by the men in her life, by her ex's cruelty, by Dominic's protection and subsequent abandonment. It was time to define herself. She was drafting her resignation letter when her phone rang. Dominic, her heart stopped. She stared at his name on the screen, torn between answering and letting it ring through to voicemail. On the 6th ring, she answered. "What do you want?" "I need to see you." His voice sounded wrong, strained. "Have nothing to say to you?" "Important." The pleas broke her resolve. "Fine. Tomorrow. 1 p.m. The coffee shop near my apartment. You have 15 minutes? She hung up before he could respond. That night, she barely slept. When she arrived at the coffee shop the next day, he was already there. Sitting at a corner table, looking like he hadn't slept in days, she sat across from him without ordering anything. "Talk." He studied her face, and something in his expression looked like regret. "I made a mistake. Understatement of the year. I let fear control me. Fear of what my board would think. Fear of bad press. Fear of what it meant that I was falling for you." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "So you pushed me away instead?" "Yes. And now? What changed?" He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table between them. "My father called me 3 days ago. He's never called me before in 35 years. Never once reached out. But he saw the articles. Saw the scandal. And you know what he said? Eleanor waited. Said I was just like him. Putting business before people. Sacrificing anything real for the sake of reputation and control. And for the first time in my life, I realized he was right." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "My father destroyed every relationship he ever had because he couldn't let anyone get close enough to hurt him. He died alone. Wealthy. Successful. Completely alone. And I'm following the exact same path." Eleanor's throat tightened. "So this is what? A crisis of conscience?" "This is me realizing I'd rather risk everything than lose you." The words hung in the air between them. "You already lost me, Dominic. The moment you chose your company over what we had, I know, and I have to live with that. But I'm not here to ask for another chance. She frowned. Then why are you here? He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table.
Oh, yeah.
One I should have made 2 weeks ago. She opened the envelope. Inside was a press release dated for tomorrow morning. Her eyes scanned the text, and shock rippled through her. It was a statement from Dominic. A real one. Not sanitized by lawyers or publicists. It acknowledged the article about her as a malicious attack by her ex. It took full responsibility for the arrangement between them, explaining that what started as a business deal had evolved into something real. It addressed his board directly, stating that he refused to sacrifice his personal life for corporate approval. And if they couldn't accept that, they could find a new CEO. You can't publish this, she said, looking up at him. This will destroy you. Maybe, he said quietly, but keeping silent already destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm done choosing wrong. Tears burned behind her eyes. Why now? Why not 2 weeks ago when it mattered? Because 2 weeks ago, I was still a coward. I had to lose you completely before I understood what I'd given up. He stood, preparing to leave. Wait, she said. He looked at her. Hope and fear warring in his expression. If you publish this, you lose everything. Your board will force you out. Your reputation will take years to rebuild. Is that really worth it? He smiled sadly. You are. The words broke something open inside her. She stood, closing the distance between them. I can't promise this will work, she said quietly. I can't promise I'll ever fully trust you again. I know. But if you're serious about this, about choosing differently, then I need you to prove it. How? Don't publish the statement. His eyes widened. What? Don't sacrifice your career for me. That's not what I want. Instead, take me to your next board meeting. Introduce me properly. Not as some scandal to be managed, but as someone who matters to you. Face them together instead of hiding behind press releases. Understanding dawned in his expression. You want me to fight for us in front of the people who matter most? I want you to fight for us, period. Not with grand gestures or public statements, but by actually changing. By letting people in? By choosing to be vulnerable, even when it's terrifying? He stepped closer, his hand reaching up to cup her face the way he had so many times before. I don't deserve you, he said softly. No, she agreed. You don't. But maybe we can earn each other this time. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Real relationships, vulnerability, any of it. Neither do I, she said. My last real relationship destroyed me, and what we had was built on a lie. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together. What if I mess it up again? Then I'll leave. For real this time? No second chances after this, Dominic. You get one shot to prove you've changed. He nodded, understanding the weight of what she was offering. Can I kiss you? He asked. Not yet, she said. First, you need to tear up that press release. Then you need to call your board and tell them you're bringing a guest to the next meeting. Then maybe, if you do all of that, we can talk about kissing. A real smile crossed his face. The first genuine one she'd seen in weeks. You're going to make me work for this? Every single day? Good, he said. I need someone who won't let me hide. He pulled out his phone and right there in the coffee shop, tore up the press release. Then he called his assistant and scheduled a meeting with his board for the following week. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression so raw it made her chest ache. Now, he asked. She smiled, stepping into his arms. Now, when he kissed her, it felt different from every kiss before. No performance. No cameras. No carefully maintained distance. Just two broken people choosing to try again. Eleanor knew it wouldn't be easy. Knew there would be more fights, more moments of doubt, more times when his instinct to retreat would clash with her need for honesty. But as she stood there in his arms, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the murmur of strangers going about their ordinary lives, she also knew it would be worth it. Because this time, they weren't making a deal, they were making a choice. And sometimes, that made all the difference. 6 months later, Eleanor stood backstage at a charity gala. adjusting Dominic's tie while he complained about having to give a speech. "I'm a CEO, not a motivational speaker," he grumbled. "You'll be fine," she assured him. "Just talk about the foundation, about why supporting survivors of emotional abuse matters to you." He met her eyes in the mirror, his expression softening. "It matters because you matter." She smiled, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "Sap, your fault." They'd had rough moments. His board had indeed been furious about their relationship, and he'd spent months rebuilding trust. Her ex had tried one last time to cause trouble before finally giving up and moving to another city. But through it all, they'd chosen each other. Every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "Ready?" she asked. He took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "With you? Always." They walked onto the stage together, and as applause filled the ballroom, Eleanor caught sight of Maya in the front row. Beaming with pride, this wasn't the fairy tale she'd once imagined. It was messy and complicated and required constant work, but it was real, and real. She'd learned was so much better than perfect. As Dominic began his speech, his hand never leaving hers, Eleanor realized something profound. She'd grabbed a stranger's hand that night to escape. Humiliation, but she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself, and along the way, she'd found him too. The end.